Hello and welcome to our today's webinar on the topic of how to build optimal drug quality with ICH Q10. I'm Jan Kugel, the Managing Director at Qualistry, and I will be your host for today. And at Qualistry, we are dedicated to empowering professionals in regulated industries to stay current with the latest trends through engaging webinars, practical resources, and by giving top industry experts a stage to share real-world experience. This session is planned for up to 90 minutes, and it will include a Q&A. And note that the webinar is recorded, and our event partner, Qualio, will send the recording to all the registrants in a few days after the event. And very important, we will distribute certificates of attendance to everyone who stays throughout the entire session, at least until the Q&A. So please stick with us, and you will get them to your inbox within 24 hours. Please check the spam spam box as well, please, to make sure that it didn't land there if you don't find it. Regarding the Q&A, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to submit questions. Please don't submit the questions in the general chat, because that way we will just oversee those questions. And please submit them in the Q&A box. We will monitor them and try also to answer them also during, in between slides if possible, or at the Q&A session at the end. So as a quick overview, you know that ICH Q10 is the international reference for an effective pharmaceutical quality system. Today we'll walk through why Q10 matters for regulatory success and operational excellence, how to meet its key requirements, and practical ways to embed a culture of continuous quality in your organization. And you will also see actionable tips and a quick demo of compliance intelligence tool map to the Q10 framework. And of course, I would like to thank our event partner, Qualio. Qualio provides a secure, scalable cloud quality management system designed for life sciences companies. They help organizations automate critical quality processes and simplify compliance, which makes them an ideal partner for this session. And joining me today as a co-moderator is Alex Pavlovich, a senior marketing manager at Qualio. He will guide the session with me, and he will take care of the Q&A. And now he will also introduce the speakers. So Alex, thank you for joining, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Jan. Hi, everybody. Great to see so many people logging in to join us for today's session on ICH Q10. Really appreciate you tuning in with us today. So, as Jan's just said there, my name's Alex, and I'll be your co-moderator for today's session. That really means it's my job to keep our speakers on schedule today, and also to receive your questions throughout the session and pass it along to them. So you'll see the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen next to the chat function, as Jan says. Please use that if you have any questions throughout the session. And an important thing to note, if you have a burning question about ICH Q10, or you want to dive deeper into something on a particular slide, for instance, you don't need to wait until the dedicated Q&A section at the end of the webinar. You can submit something, and if I get a suitable moment to really quickly interrupt one of our speakers and get your question answered a little bit more quickly, then we'll try and do that as well. So we want today to be an interactive experience that's as rewarding and insightful for you guys as possible. So keep those questions coming. Don't hesitate to reach out. And I'll move on to the next slide and introduce your speakers for today. So we've got two experts from the pharma industry to guide you through ICH Q10 today. So the first is my colleague at Qualio, Jerry Adatsi. He's a certified quality auditor with over 15 years of experience in life sciences, spanning everything from food science, pharmaceutical and biotech manufacturing, diagnostic labs, medical devices as well. He specializes in quality management systems and regulatory compliance, guiding organizations to meet stringent global industry standards and regulations. Jerry holds a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Georgia Southern University and a doctorate in Business Administration with a focus on management from George Fox University as well. So as you can see on the slide here, currently Jerry serves as Senior Product Quality Specialist here at Qualio, and he's been in that position following years of consulting with a string of organisations like the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, which you might know as the CDC. And joining Jerry today is Amanda Inks. Amanda is an accomplished QA professional with over a decade of experience across clinical research, pharma manufacturing, and the medical device industries as well. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from North Carolina State and began a career in phase one drug substance manufacturing at Novartis. Amanda quickly found a passion in QA, holding roles at Novo Nordisk, Medable. She was at Qualio for a while as well, which is how we know Amanda, and Icon Strategic Solutions as well. And she currently serves as Senior Manager of Quality Assurance at BioRassi. BioRassi is the go-to CRO for complex clinical trials that demand reliability, flexibility, and transparency. And Amanda's expertise spans everything from ICH, GCP, and ISO standards right through to Alcoa Plus, 21 CFR, Parts 11, 210, 11, 820, with a focus on harmonizing quality systems to meet global regulatory expectations. So, two seasoned industry veterans to walk you through ICH Q10 today. So, let's take a look at today's agenda. So, we've got 5 areas to cover today. We'll start with looking at what ICH Q10 means for your compliance and how it can be used to bring new levels of quality and compliance to your organization. We'll look at some top tips, some myths to bust about ICH Q10, top tips for success, and things you can do to streamline your ICH Q10 compliance activities and make ICH Q10 a natural part of how your business operates. And Qualio has a very exciting announcement that we'd like to tease in section 4 of today's webinar. We'll be offering pharmaceutical companies like yours a new way to master your ICH and GMP requirements at speed. So my colleague Colin will be taking just a few minutes to share that with you guys. And then we'll wrap up today's session with your chance to get any final questions answered by Jerry and Amanda so that you leave feeling fully confident and ready to take on ICH Q10 at your company. So, if we move on to the next slide, we want to start by asking you a quick poll. We want to start by asking, what's your main compliance challenge right now? You'll see that come up on your screen now. Just take a couple of seconds to vote on the option that's relevant for you. All right, hopefully we can start seeing the results coming through there.
Yeah, so there people are filling out the results actively, and
We'll give it a few more
yeah,
seconds.
so we're getting it's going on strong still. Give you a couple more seconds. Okay, so I think we got most of the results in.
Thanks,
And
Jan.
you should see it on the screen right now.
Perfect, thank you. So it looks like the main challenge that you guys are seeing is monitoring your QMS, ensuring continued compliance, followed by a little bit of a tie, understanding exactly what the requirements are and knowing where you're currently compliant and where you aren't. So some really interesting findings there, and something that we can touch on towards the end of today's session when we introduce Colin. So thank you for that. We'll move on to the second and final poll for today, and this one is a multi-choice, so you can select more than one option this time. So if you'd like to trigger that one, please, Jan, and we'll give everyone a few seconds to fill that one in.
Yes. So let me just update it to the multiple choice, and it will go on in a few seconds.
Thank you.
And here we go.
So as you can see there, what tools are you using for your pharmaceutical quality and compliance activities? Just select the tools and systems that are applicable to you. We'll give you a few more seconds to fill that in.
Yeah, so the results are coming in very interesting. So we are very equal, like all over the board here. So from paper spreadsheets, online folders, so and QMS. I'll give you a few more seconds to think about. So you can choose multiple options if you use more than one solution. Okay, I think we got most of the answer by now. And let's see the results.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, you're right. That is a fairly even split there. So I see 40% of folks still using paper. That's something that we found. We actually run an annual survey at Qualio of global life science quality professionals, and that 40% figure has been fairly standard for a few years now. So it's interesting that for all the talk of digitization and automation of quality, there's still a lot of paper hanging around. So something for us all to think about and address over the next few years. 58% using a dedicated electronic quality management system. That's great news. That's what we do. So hats off to you folks. So thank you. Just a little bit of scene setting there. Interesting to see what you guys are struggling with and what you use in day to day for your pharmaceutical quality and compliance activities. So if we move on to the next slide then, and I will hand over to Amanda to actually kick off today's session. Over to you, Amanda.
Perfect. Thank you, Alex. Definitely some interesting polls. So I think a lot of companies really stop at implementing the basic GMP and quality risk management principles, but ICH Q10 really pushes companies further. They want quality to be embedded into the entire product lifecycle, which is really good to do because it does help with that continuous improvement and feedback into your organization. So before we get started, ICH, just in case there are folks that don't know, is the International Conference on Harmonization. It was originally created to align technical standards for product registration in the US, Japan, and in Europe. Out of that conference, we get these amazing guidelines, ICH Q10 being one of them, specifically for the pharmaceutical quality system. It was finalized in June of 2008, and wasn't adopted by the FDA until 2009. So let's take a look. This should be a familiar diagram. It is Annex 2 within ICH Q10. Something important about this is it does cover every part of the development pipeline, so from development and tech transfer to commercial manufacturing and product discontinuation. A lot of these elements within Q10 align closely with GMP requirements, but also with ISO 9001. Talking about some of the dates for finalization of ICH Q10, ISO 9001 was most recently updated in 2015 and is actually planned for another revision in late 2026. So always making sure that you're kind of pairing your guidelines and standards, making sure you're getting the most up-to-date information and harmonizing even your guidelines and standards together. I do want to call out development here. I think it's really easy for folks to be like, oh, development is early phase. It's not necessarily part of a really well-developed quality system, but that's definitely not true. Having worked in all different parts of the development pipeline, I've worked in drug substance and drug product and then transitioned into commercial manufacturing and am now with a CRO in clinical trials. It's easy to see the synergies between all different phases of development. These include things like supplier oversight, risk management, quality management. All of these principles are really the same. It's just a different level of how they're applied based on risk-based approaches. Throughout this, we will dig a little bit deeper into each one of these aspects of ICH Q10. So the first is what's usually covered. What do most companies start considering up front? I think that's GMP, the quality system, and quality risk management. You get the basics of these set up, and you may end up actually creating these in silos where your manufacturing department, your quality department, your distribution department all have their process and their operations, but they all do them separately from one another. And you don't want to create those silos from in your organization. I'm hoping nobody has these stories, but I know they are familiar where you've got quality organizations that don't necessarily work well with production. And then you've got operations that may not inform quality of their processes. It's just a last minute thing like, hey, this is what we want to do. And that really builds those silos. And it's a shame to hear those stories. So, Jerry, I see you smiling. Do you have any similar stories?
Yes, yes, I do. Actually, I worked at an organization where um, I was working with the clinical group within the organization as a consultant, and the group really resisted and rejected the implementation of quality principles. They are taught when I was working with them was essentially that they are researchers, and because they are researchers, they don't need quality. They don't need to implement quality. They don't need anything to do with quality. But the truth is that had they implemented quality, they would actually optimize their processes. Things like it's a simple thing like laboratory notebooks can be easily managed and be in a state of control. And essentially what happens is that when quality is ignored from early on, like you mentioned, you basically become siloed. And basically the knowledge that needs to be transferred from development all the way across the spectrum, it basically doesn't happen. And so that is an issue that needs to be looked at from the very beginning.
Right. And that's implementing those principles of quality by design up front, making sure you're taking that proactive approach and everybody's kind of working together because it provides that easy transition.
Yep.
I do want to look at quality risk management because I think risk management in general is having its day in the sun. Not only does Q10 have principles of risk management, but ISO 9001 does as well. And ICH Q9. Q9 is its own, definition of quality risk management. It's something that I think there's been a high focus over the last couple of years in making sure that we're very cognizant about where we're placing those resources and putting our effort into those higher risk areas and, still making sure low risk areas are documented, but not being as stringent in those cases. So implementing these isn't a burden. It definitely helps reduce your rework, improve your efficiency, and overall build that regulatory trust. So these are the aspects that are usually covered. So what's missing? So from that diagram, I hope you recognize these as the two enabler pillars: management responsibilities and knowledge management. So where are we if our leadership isn't pushing quality objectives? I've heard the stories where, QA and quality assurance topics are QA department's problems. It's not. You need those leaders really to push those deliverables. They need to set those quality objectives and then allocate for the resources up front, perform those management reviews, make sure those metrics are meaningful, and then support that culture of quality. And if you don't have that support, it just essentially becomes a paper pushing exercise, which I don't think anybody really wants. You want to have meaningful work. And then there's knowledge management. And we will talk about this a little later, but when knowledge management isn't just your LMS, which I think it typically gets confused with, it's so much more in making sure that your development informs your manufacturing, your post-market surveillance informs your product design, and that you really have those processes set up to like capture, transfer, and then apply any knowledge. It cannot be trapped in certain areas and not communicated because it does lead to mistakes and repeat mistakes. So both of these two pillars do drive up the cost of poor quality, which I think leads nicely into why. Why do we need to do more for the cost of poor quality?
Yeah. So the thing about poor quality is that, simply put it, it is expensive. Poor quality is expensive. And when we think about poor quality, we are really talking about things like failed batches. We're talking about recalls. We are talking about warning letters or um, regulatory penalties. Each one of those things have a way of hitting the bottom line, whether we want to agree or not. And I know, speaking as a consultant, former consultant, um, the cost for remediating penalties, it usually range, for paying a consultant, it can range from upwards of $500 an hour. So remediating costing $500 an hour, and this is not a one-day type of work. We're talking about months. We're talking about, in some cases, it can be up to a year. And so that cost basically stacks up pretty quickly. So implementing quality upfront actually helps save money in the long run. Another issue when we talk about the cost of quality is that uh, it really can lead to reputational damage. You as an organization and even you as an individual, um, the cost of poor quality when it becomes publicly known actually leads to, can actually damage your brand and your reputation in the market. So investing upfront actually reduces the long-term cost as well as the risk to not only your product, but your brand.
This is true for both pharmaceuticals and in the food science industry. So I know a lot of times national news is made, if there's ice cream mix-ups due to contamination, and same thing with like spinach.
Mhm.
It's definitely in the news and makes you think twice when you go to the grocery store to select something.
Yeah.
So the next level of pharma, it's not necessarily enough to just meet requirements. You really want to exceed them. They want to see you're putting dedication, regulators want to see you're putting dedication into improvements and really making a robust quality system overall. So, give me one second. Why? Why do we need to build in ICH Q10? So it's a guidance document. It's not necessarily a requirement. You don't get certified to it. So why is it important? It really is an integrated approach with both Q8 and Q9 and provides those synergies with ISO. So you're kind of hitting a whole bunch of guidances all at once. It builds in that quality by design and the continuous improvement for you. It helps you formulate better CAPAs, better change controls, and just overall making sure that knowledge management pipeline is throughout your entire development lifecycle. You can hand it over from tech transfer to manufacturing. And once you get to market, you really want to stay there. You don't want a bad name for your brand. I think it's also good to mention that the CFR provides GMP requirements, but Q10 and the ISO standards really help you build that framework. So where one builds the floor, the others help build the walls around that regulatory floor. And it tells you how to do things, not just what you must do. And it builds in that proactive approach as well. So now digging a little bit deeper into the 5 clauses. The quality system itself, there are 4 broad requirements. There's process performance and product quality, where it's not just enough to do validation. You need to have that continuous oversight of those critical parameters and product quality attributes. You need to make sure that you have any early detection of variability so that you can make those adjustments and have a consistent product that you're delivering to market. The second is CAPA. I hope everybody is familiar with CAPA. That's your corrective and preventative actions. It's not just about fixing a problem. You really want to make sure you're doing investigations to find the true root cause and then establishing those effectiveness check metrics to make sure that you did find the root cause and you've addressed the problem so you don't have it recurring. So I see a lot of CAPAs really rush to meet deadlines, leading into superficial root cause analysis. And the one most commonly picked on, I think, by everybody is human error. And then, of course, naturally, the retraining is your corrective action afterwards. So really implementing a root cause analysis that's robust and uses root cause analysis tools. So I'm sure you have your favorite. What's your favorite root cause analysis tool?
Well, mine, I think, will be the fishbone diagram, mainly because I think the fishbone diagram works nicely in the sense that it removes subjectivity from the problem solving. In that sense that you don't focus so much on your views, but you focus more on the system and the issue at hand. I think using the fishbowl diagram, you can actually assess frameworks of the quality system, such as people, processes, materials, um, equipment, and even environmental factors or external factors that may have impact on the quality of the product. But it allows you to do all of that without actually being subjective. There are other tools. 5 Whys is another one that people love to use. I personally don't like that one because I think there's a lot more subjectivity in that one where you may not be able to ask all 5 Whys, but the fishbone diagram, you can't go wrong with it because you're actually assessing each system of your quality system.
Right. If you go into Lean Six Sigma, I've seen A3s in one of my previous employments. We used A3s and it really helped like define the problem and then work all the way through. There was a fishbone and then it led to a 5 Why. And I will say it was extremely difficult. That was a lot of analysis trying to make sure that you defined each area. Um, One of the thirds is change management. I think, change is inevitable. You get new formulations, you get new equipment, but having a well-developed change management process where you clearly define the problem, lay out those actions, and get those documented and completed. One of the biggest things I see fail here at change management is always pre-plan a rollout plan. I think that gets underestimated quite a bit. If you're implementing a change, what if something goes wrong? The time to have that rollback plan is when you pre-plan it, not as you're actively making that change. Then also coming back to change management and making sure you're closing out that change. So anybody looking at your documentation later really understands what happened and has that conclusion statement for that change process. And then the last is management review. This is leadership's opportunity to gather those metrics of your QMS and make or quality system overall and make those informed decisions. So I just talked about management review, but management review is a specific action. Management responsibility is like a leader's goal. They need to accept management responsibility for their entire organization. It's, strong leadership really helps drive a good quality system so that it doesn't get stagnant. And you want people to feel engaged and have that open communication with their leaders so that they feel safe reporting any issues or improvement ideas. Really, not everything is an issue. It's it's not just signing off on SOPs. It's about having that overall governance structure and then planning out those operations and allocating the appropriate resources to that. Um, it, proper management responsibility really shows the leadership's commitment to that quality system and leads into the FDA's quality management maturity program, right? There's usually 3 steps to it they define. So you implement your regular GMPs, you move into this guideline framework for Q10, and then you get to a gold star standard where you have a quality management maturity program that's in place where you can just see that every process is cyclical and informs the other, making those iterative improvements. Moving on to continual improvement of your process performance and product quality. So validation isn't a one-time exercise. It really starts the process for your ongoing monitoring and then incremental improvements to improve the efficiency and reliability of your processes. The same can kind of be true for your product. So your product has stability studies, market surveillance, and we report complaints. From those, we gain those insights that we need to, pretty much sharpen the product as a whole. Make those adjustments and make sure you have a consistent quality for patients that you're providing these to. This is kind of at its core the quality by design, making sure that you really embed quality into these processes so that you can make those observations through these strategies, through these control strategies, and then feed that back into your system. It is a life cycle. You hope that knowledge doesn't stay in one process or phase, and what you learn in development informs your commercial, and then what you learn in post-market feedback informs the design of your product. So make sure you build in a good feedback loop so you're capturing everything to make those product and process improvements. Continual improvement of the quality system. So a little bit different because this is the quality system processes and not necessarily like your stability and your process documents and process validation. So how do we ensure continual improvement of the quality system? You do regular self-assessments. You do those internal audits. And an internal audit is not a fault-finding mission. It is and should be a pairing with operations and manufacturing to really find those issues ahead of time and address them internally without having it be seen by either a client audit or even a regulator afterwards, which is definitely not where you want to find issues. It starts with making sure that you have the right metrics and trending. You need to make sure that you have the right indicators, not just numbers thrown at a board. And it doesn't have to be complicated or cumbersome. You can have, and this is what I've seen in previous working experience, is review boards. A well-working review board, the individual contributor comes with their metrics, reports those to mid-level management. Mid-level management can make those decisions, look at factors as a whole, and then report those up. Some of the boards that I've seen are change control boards, deviation boards, and like supplier governance boards. And I feel like they work really well. Have you had any experience with those boards, Jerry?
I have, and I think when we think about those boards, you made a good point earlier by mentioning the importance of having meaningful metrics and KPIs, and that's essentially what those boards should be doing. We should be defining what those metrics and what those KPIs are, and just making sure that they're not surface level metrics. We take Kappa, for example, and I've seen organizations, and you mentioned this earlier also, organization will trend their root cause to simply be human error. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you might find that, well, maybe the reason why you have a human error was because maybe your method or your SOP wasn't clear. Maybe the reason why you have a human error might be an external factor. The employee might have some issue going on, personally, that might be impacting their work. And then, when you just leave it as human error, what often happens is that your corrective action that you are going to put into place is not going to be effective in addressing what the actual issue is. Another example is that, and you mentioned this earlier also, is that usually whenever there is a human error, we always go to things like retraining. But if retraining can solve that human error issue, then there shouldn't be a retraining to start with. So that actually speaks to, if you have to do multiple retrainings, that actually speaks to a problem with your training program. That means your training program is actually broken. So we need to actually dig a little bit deeper to find what the real issue is, and then implement corrective action that will actually address those issues, as opposed to just, as you mentioned, having numbers, that basically just show that we've done something but not really addressed the issue.
Yep. And I think that's where management review comes into. So they need to look at those metrics, find out that they're meaningful. People need to feel safe enough to communicate any improvement ideas they have. And then management needs to inform those decisions to make the best and biggest impact improvements to that quality system.
Mhm. Yeah.
So kind of a smaller section is just the glossary in the back, and there's 3 terms and phrases to kind of know. Design space, which is also within ICH Q8, and these are the boundaries for your process where you can operate safely. Anything outside of this design space really needs to go through regulatory approval in some cases. So making sure you're operating within those parameters in a controlled manner, and then getting any approvals that you need to outside of those controls. Enabler, so this was on the diagram from Annex 2. There were 2 enablers: management responsibilities and knowledge management. You need your enablers to be flexible and adaptive so that you can continuously improve. And then state of control, which sometimes I wish my house was in a state of control. So a state of control is what regulators want to see. It means that your processes and products are consistently performing in the boundaries that you've set for them. And you also have the data, because it's well established, to back that up. So you know that state of control exists. So GMP and GDP, in this case, GDP, good distribution practices, not necessarily good documentation practices, which is smaller GDP. We love the acronyms. These 2 are really the foundation of your compliance. GMP ensures that, products are consistently manufactured to the right standards. And GDP is really your supply chain oversight, making sure that both of those operate together and then aren't developed in isolation from one another, so that your manufacturing, storage, and distribution are all in one connected framework that speak to each other and inform each other. It shifts, these 2 elements shift you from reactive to being proactive, and risks can be identified early if that quality has been built in from the beginning. GDP plays a particularly important role in today's supply chains, because we need to make sure that medicines maintain their quality all the way to the patient. I know during the pandemic, if anybody remembers, there was actually a news report from Johnson & Johnson, and it had to do with one of their supply chains. There was actually a mix-up in the vaccine material for one of their suppliers. Well, potential suppliers. They hadn't actually become a supplier yet. And that supplier's internal QC checks actually did catch the error. But I still remember thinking to myself, oop, now I know Johnson & Johnson has been in the news. Which one of these shots am I choosing? So trying to make sure that you really have that good outsourcing oversight established so that you catch any issues before they occur. Do you have any similar situations, Sherry?
I have. I think it was actually earlier this year. There was this was mainly dealing with medical device, but there was an issue with a CEO that is facing 40 years in prison. And the reason being that the suppliers, they didn't really evaluate their suppliers correctly. They were actually using parts to manufacture their device that were not really properly qualified. Of course, that led to patients being injured. And as a result of that, that CEO is actually now facing possibly 40 years in prison because of that. This is one of the reasons why organizations have a responsibility of qualifying their suppliers. Even if you do outsource your manufacturing, you still have the responsibility to ensure the product, your product meets quality standards and as well as regulatory requirements. It's important for organizations, quality managers, top management to really make sure that their quality system is robust enough, and just also making sure that they have a well-implemented quality agreement. Having a great or good quality agreement in place actually will help you with all of these issues with suppliers in the future.
Right. You want those mature, resilient systems.
Yep.
Can I interrupt really
All right.
quickly, Amanda, and pass a question on from the audience, if that's okay? So we have a question from Adrian, which is, can you give us your opinions? And this could be either you or Jerry or both of you giving your input here, but can you give us your opinions regarding where the CAPA system stops and the change management process starts? If the CAPA system investigates root causes and identifies potential actions, shouldn't those CAPAs then be implemented using the change control process to ensure there is appropriate management of any associated risks, etc.?
So for me, that becomes dependent. So first, when you have an issue, is it a planned issue or is it an unplanned issue? If it's a planned issue and it's occurring before, that automatically should go through your change management process. At that point, it's pre-planned, it's a change. You can even do an emergency change. If it's an issue that's already occurred, to me, that would go through your CAPA system. And those CAPA actions, depending on the scope of those CAPA actions, can prompt a change if it meets the requirements of what's needed per your procedure. So if you notice as part of a CAPA that it requires an update to your QMS system, and you're in that part of your QMS system is a validated parameter, at that point you would need to make sure you do revalidation, and that would prompt potentially a system change control. So it's really dependent on the issue that's being reported.
Correct.
Makes sense.
Yeah, now I agree with that. I think, especially if you are using the change management system to initiate that, you can bring in your root cause analysis at that point to figure out what the issue is before actually even moving into CAPA, if you wanted to move into CAPA. I have previous experience where we, instead of just going straight to CAPA, we have what we call non-conformances or deviations in the pharma world, where you will actually determine if this is actually a deviation that can be easily corrected, or if this is one that requires a corrective action. And then from your investigation into the corrective action, you can make that determination of whether a CAPA is needed, which of course gives you a longer time frame to actually truly investigate and monitor what has actually been implemented to see if they actually are working or not.
Makes sense. Thank you both for those very in-depth answers. I don't think we've got any more outstanding questions right now. We had one about superficial metrics, but I think you've touched on that a little bit actually since that question was asked. So I'll let you crack on with the rest of the slides, and I'll interrupt if we get any more questions. Keep your questions coming, please, folks. Thank you.
Okay. So let's talk about optimizing your quality system and what elements go into that. So simplify your systems as much as possible. Nobody likes complexity. Complexity creates risk and confusion. The simpler, the better. I mean, you can oversimplify, so don't go too far, but definitely seeing where you can streamline those processes is an award winner. Improve the content of your records. You know, a record should clearly show what happened and why it happened. I am just going to use the example of like deviation records. One of the things I say whenever I'm reviewing deviations all the time is make sure you're explaining the issue to someone like you're sitting with them at your dinner table and they have no idea about the issue, because you are very close. Potentially the investigator or even the teams that informed the investigator are very close to that issue. They're very knowledgeable about it. But you're explaining that to someone potentially a year down the line. You may not be there. Someone else may not be there. So make sure you've captured all of that background that's needed for someone to fully understand what happened. Meaningful metrics, kind of, I think this goes back to one of the other questions. You know, it doesn't just mean how many. Okay, how many did we have? I mean, yes, that's an indicator. You don't want a lot, but are they on specific processes? You also need to look at metrics that are potentially outside of your system, and it may not be a specific number metric, but look at external factors like regulatory changes. Look at your supplier corrective actions. See if you can find, those metrics matter to improving the supplier process. Look at any recent recalls or product issues for products that are similar to yours. See if something that occurred there is also very similar to your organization. And then, of course, your management review. Management review should funnel up some of the metrics to all of these and all of the elements of your quality system in a condensed and easy to use fashion for your leadership team to make those decisions. Quality risk management, quality risk management is a critical enabler. You really need to ensure that you identify those risks and try to prevent them going into the future, because any risk that could potentially impact patients or your business, you want to make sure that they have been identified, they've been controlled, and they're mitigated. So always make sure risk is documented. And usually it's documented in these processes up front. So I know some products use risk registers, you've got FMEA analysis, you even have simple risk assessments. But each time you make iterations, you also need to make sure those risk processes and risk tools are updated. So I also feel like quality risk management and a good implementation really helps teams understand their product better. So you're not just saying, this does this. You're more thinking, oh, okay, this does this, but how does it interact with other processes within my product or within this system or process itself? So it asks deeper questions, really informing people to have a better understanding and a deeper understanding. It's not a one-time activity, it is a life cycle activity. Management responsibility, they do have big responsibilities. They need to set up that governance structure. You need to be fully aware of who has what role, what actions do they take. They need to implement that culture and open communication. It starts most of the time with leaders. If you notice your leader not caring much about quality objectives or not caring much about improvement ideas, they just want to get the daily work done, your team is going to take that approach. I think that makes it harder on people, later on. They also need to include quality and quality system objectives in their operations planning. It's not always about getting from point A to point B. It's about getting there and planning that out in a manner in which includes those quality objectives, includes that risk. And then I don't think anybody has unlimited resources. I think that's known. But making sure we put those resources to the best possible place and address the highest risk items. You need to provide teams with the right tools, training, and support. These tools could also be tech tools and not just personnel tools. So do you have a system that could do it better? Instead of managing this through a paper-based process, could you have an EQMS? Could you have a system in place? And making sure that the personnel that you have feel supported so that you take them from an individual contributor really to an SME in their field, making sure that your processes are documented and well taken care of. So do you have any thoughts on resource management?
Yes. I think when it comes to resource management, oftentimes we assume that resources is basically just dealing with things like materials and things of that nature. But there's also that your personnel are also resources, and just making sure that you have personnel that are competent to do the tasks that they were hired to do makes a big difference. My previous experience, I worked in a place where the organization was basically hiring personnel to manufacture their product, but the personnel that don't really necessarily have any life science background at all. There were some that were actually working in grocery stores just a month prior to manufacturing products for patients to use, and that poses a lot of risk, right? Because what happens when those personnel were brought in was that we immediately started seeing that our incident levels significantly increased. We started having more failed batches. We started having more issues with deviations happening, unplanned deviations taking place. So that tells you that making sure that you have resource, your personnel that actually touching the product are competent and that they are trained to actually do the work that they are hired to do.
Yep. We actually, at one of my previous organizations, they worked closely with universities to go through some of those classes. It was just like a 3-month program. You got a certificate for like aseptic manufacturing. And it was very easy to transition into the life sciences industry, having some of that experience before you even started in those roles.
Another few questions coming through, folks. In the interest of time, we'll not tackle all of them right now, but I might pass over a couple now if that's all right with you both. While we're on the management responsibilities slide, we've got a question. Should management reviews be held annually or more frequently?
It's a
It depends, right? I've seen people do management reviews monthly. I've seen it done quarterly. I've seen it done biannually. And I've seen it done yearly. It really depends on your organization, your product. And personally, I think monthly is a little bit of an overkill. It's a little bit too much, but I'd like to see Amanda, what you think about that.
Yeah, I agree. So I like seeing, quarterly or annually, depending on how well informed top leadership wants to be. So if you do monthly with, mid-level management, you have those review boards, you report up those metrics. Quarterly, you build out the deck that gets, sent up to top leadership. It's your next level. And then annually, you have that overview where you can kind of see, all right, we had process performance over these 4 quarters. How are we going to tackle these objectives coming into the next year? And how are we going to prioritize those in terms of resource management and risk mitigation? So it really depends on the level of involvement and the level of information. So, I mean, quarterly, it would be ideal to at least have some forum to present all of those metrics.
And don't forget also you add your annual product reviews. That can also be included, right? So the product reviews usually happen once a year, so that's usually an annual thing. So all of that can be combined with your management review. I mean, it needs to be done individually, but that's a metric that I think senior leadership need to also be aware of.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks both. Next question is it's from Dominique, and it's around experiences of systems or process simplification using AI solutions. So I think we'll park that question for like another 10 minutes because Dominique, we can give you a bit more of a hands-on answer to that question when I hand over to my colleague Colin. So I'll let you guys move on with the slides for now, and we'll come back to using AI for your pharmaceutical compliance.
Okay. Knowledge management. Knowledge management is so much more than your LMS. It's the build out of structured processes, making sure you have that formal documentation of how processes transition from one stage to a next, and it gives that full life cycle oversight. It must flow through these systems or else it just becomes siloed to one individual. Jared, do you have that experience?
I do. In one of my consulting roles, like I mentioned, I actually worked with a clinical group in the past, and one of the things that I noticed was that usually would tend to have subject matter experts that are, maybe they've been with the company for, 10, 20 years, but they are the subject matter expert. They are the go-to for everything. They wrote the test methods, they wrote the SOPs, and essentially what happens is that they become the one that basically control that knowledge. And you have to go to them for everything. So what happens is if they go on vacation, operations pretty much stops. If they decide to leave the company, that's even worse, right? Because now they are taking all of that knowledge with them. So it is very important to have a process that is well structured, a process that allows for effective transfer of knowledge from one person to the entire organization. And this can be done through SOPs, work instructions, and so on and so forth, our policies. Those are some of the ways that knowledge can be transferred. And instead of allowing it to stay with one individual, it should be structured in such a way that the entire organization is basically encouraged to be part of that knowledge, not only generating that knowledge, but also transferring to other parts of the organization. Quality shouldn't be with just the quality team. That knowledge should be transferred to metrology or the shop floor and so on and so forth.
Yep. Yes. And it's so easy. So when companies are smaller, that knowledge is easy to transfer because everybody's right around each other. And so everybody talks to each other, and you do have that one person that's the SME and informing those processes. But as companies grow into corporations and you get into some of these larger pharma companies, you'll see that procedures are extremely detailed and in some cases have work instructions and job aids that come out of it. Because it's different when you have a team of 2 performing something and then you have teams, multiple 3 different teams performing something. You don't want any variability in interpretation. So having those clear process instructions is extremely important.
Yeah.
I am going to hand it over for some tips and mistakes and how we make ICH Q10 a success.
Okay, so now before we really talk about how we can effectively implement Q10, I think it's probably best to talk about some of the few common mistakes that people make when trying to implement ICH Q10. Now, probably the first one I think is thinking that because Q10 is a guidance and not a mandatory requirement, it should not be implemented. And so many people actually don't even bother with Q10 at all because no regulator is going to audit you based on Q10. And so therefore, why even try it at all? But the problem is that when you ignore Q10, you actually are missing an opportunity to actually have a system that is robust and that is ever evolving and actually helps you create and distribute more products that are high in quality that patients can actually enjoy. Another mistake that people make is that they assume that they have to start from scratch. I am a big believer that you don't have to start from scratch. I think one of the best ways that you can do anything in life is to basically learn from people's mistakes or learn from their successes, or combine both, learn from their mistakes and successes. So instead of starting from scratch, there are already systems out there that you can actually take and build upon. Instead of starting from scratch, you can actually find a system that can connect you to areas where you are weak in and actually strengthen areas that you are strong in and actually build out a process that is more robust. Another example of a mistake that people make is that they actually think that having a weak documentation or not having they don't have a strong good documentation practice. And so what happens is that you end up having, when you have weak documentation practices, you end up having more risk in the process. Amanda just mentioned moments ago how having a good SOP can actually lead to having a good work instruction, which can lead to having a good job aid. And all of that it helps your organization, it helps educate your organization, it helps keep knowledge basically distributed across the organization. So having good, not having good or strong, good documentation practices will actually hurt your quality efforts more than it will help it. Another mistake that um, that is often made is that we see management reviews are often skipped. We just talked about management review moments ago, right? Some organizations skip it altogether. Or when it's done superficially, meaning that we talked about the metrics, right? The metrics that are being measured are actually so superficial that it doesn't, it's basically um, what I'll call a paper exercise. You're doing it so that just to say you did it. And it's basically a check off instead of actually something that is meaningful, something that can actually drive how you run your business and how you produce your product. Another example, and I should say also that when that happens also, it usually sends red flags to regulators. So when you are being audited and your metrics are all superficial and all your management review is skipped, that usually will tell regulators that there's probably a bigger issue at hand than what they are probably seeing. Another one is that um, companies also will focus on rushing to get to market. And I understand it, right? Because even though we are producing drugs, right, we are still a business. And it's understandable that you want to push to get to market as quickly as possible. But at the same time, if you rush to get to market and not worried about what happens post-market, right? Because you have to worry about post-market surveillance. So if you rush to get to market, but don't think about how you're going to manage your post-market surveillance, that can become a problem in the future. So the idea of Q10 is to make sure that you are focusing, it's basically a life cycle based, meaning that compliance doesn't stop with the day you launch your product. It actually is a cycle that, and every metrics and every data that you receive from development all the way to launch comes back to the system and helps you actually navigate your next product or improve your system in the first place. Now, another one is usually, we talked about this earlier also, there's also usually a supplier oversight, right? Meaning that oftentimes we tend to not pay that much attention to suppliers. But again, this is a big problem, right? Because even if you are outsourcing your suppliers, um, you are still responsible and you are still held accountable for the product, right? You are still responsible for the quality of that product. So it's very, very important to make sure that you have oversight over your suppliers. It doesn't matter whether it's just an API, an ingredient, or if it's a full CMO that is manufacturing your product for you. Finally, I think the one of the mistakes that often happens is there's a lack of GMP training, and with that lack of GMP training, you also have lack of documentation of that training. And when you do have that, that becomes usually a common finding in most regulatory audits. And even internal audits, we find that a lot, right? We have a saying that if you don't have any proof to show that something happened, it didn't happen. So the goal is that whatever it is that you are doing, especially when it comes to your training, it has to be documented. There has to be a record that shows that you actually did perform that training and that you are qualified and competent to perform a task. all of these mistakes basically essentially have one thing in common, and that is that they will weaken your system, your quality system, and they will increase your risk of regulatory action. So the good news is, if you know these mistakes, you can avoid them. Again, the mistakes should also be as much of a help to you, just as much as successes. So now let's talk about some of the top tips that you can use to implement Q10. I mentioned earlier, one of the mistakes that people make is that they try to start from scratch. Don't start from scratch. You can use the PICS guidance, for example, to clarify any areas in Q10 that is ambiguous. And it is always, again, best to learn from somebody's success and mistakes than to start from scratch and do it yourself. So please don't start from scratch. Another one is that make sure you structure your quality system around the 4 pillars that Amanda talked about: process, performance, and product quality monitoring systems, your corrective action, your CAPA system, your change management system, your management responsibility, which is key. And then also don't forget your life cycle stages, right? From development, technology transfer, manufacturing, commercial manufacturing, and product discontinuation. So it is a cycle. And when you structure your system, structure it around those 4 pillars and the life cycle stages. It is also important to consider the tools that will help you reduce the cost of poor quality, tools that will help you measure and improve your system. It is important to make sure that you engage management. I know we talked about it a great deal, right? It is very, very important to make sure that you engage your top management, not just the QA team, but the entire organization. You need the entire organization to be able to build that quality culture. And if top leadership is not involved, Amanda mentioned it earlier, chances are your quality project or your quality goals will probably not be very successful. It is very, very important to build that quality culture. And the truth is that it really starts with not QA, not with the quality manager. It really starts with the top management. So, and the idea or the goal is to build a quality culture. So that's where I think we need to transition to now. We talk about what is a quality culture, or what that looks like, and what are some of the key indicators for that. Now, when we talk about quality culture, a culture of quality is the foundation of quality excellence. What that basically means is, if you don't have a culture of quality, you will not be successful in implementing quality or have an excellent quality program, a quality system. Your success as an organization, as a quality organization, is highly dependent on if you are able to build a quality culture. So the question is, what are some of those key indicators? Again, we mentioned what leadership commitment, right? What does that look like? Leadership commitment, for example, Amanda talked about management reviews and how they can be involved in management reviews. Another example would be things like how they communicate quality policies and quality objectives. A quick thing that top leadership can do will be to take an element of the quality policy or an element of the quality objective and simply send out quarterly communication to the entire organization, explaining why that element of the policy or objective is so important and why every individual within the organization should buy in. That alone can help build that quality culture. Another example would be the recruitment practices, right? So making sure that new hires are competent, making sure that they have the appropriate credentials for their specific roles that they were hired. Given the example that I gave earlier about hiring somebody that doesn't have any life science background. So when we're talking about recruitment practices, these are some of the things that we have to keep in mind. We talked also about resource allocation. What does that mean? Most organizations usually have one individual as the quality go-to person. That is not enough. If you have one person as a quality team, then chances are you are most likely going to have more issues. That means you have one person that is responsible for managing all aspects of quality. We talked about those areas being siloed, right? So we don't want an individual, everything to be siloed to that one individual. Quality isn't about a single person. It really is an organizational effort. Leadership should recognize this and implement systems that can help them overcome those barriers of creating a quality culture. Now, it is also important to, when we talk about some additional indicators of quality culture, looking at employees, they should be really empowered they should be empowered and trained to actually drive quality. I use this example all the time. Most of the time in the pharma world, metrology is usually an organization or a department or a team within the organization that you might say, well, they probably don't need to worry about quality because they are doing calibrations of equipments and fixing broken equipment and things of that nature. But they also need to be empowered to actually implement quality, right? Because if the calibration of the, let's say, the scales were not done properly, that impacts microbiology and bioassay and in their testing process, right? So that then impacts the quality of the product. So even though metrology may seems to be far removed from the quality process, they still need to be included in that process, and they need to be empowered to actually drive quality. Another example or another indicator would be things like job descriptions and appraisals, including those things in your job descriptions. Every employee, regardless of what department they work at, should have some sort of quality metric that we can use to measure their performance. So when we are doing like performance appraisals, it has to be centered around quality, and that drives quality, because if I know my job is on the line because of quality, I'm going to actually take more effort to actually learn those principles and actually implement them in my day-to-day activities. And that actually allows me to take ownership and use quality principles to actually improve the entire process. Any
Jerry,
thoughts on that, Amanda?
Sorry, Jerry, I just wanted to interrupt really quick, just a quick time check. We only have 15 minutes remaining, so
Okay.
just in the interest of covering off all the sections, thanks for going into so much detail, but just a prompt there around time.
No problem. I think we only have a couple more slides. So,
couple more, yeah.
So, last thing about the culture of quality is that if you set the quality standard, your employees will meet it, and in some cases even exceed it. So set those standards and set them high so that employees have something to reach for. Things like customer complaints and customer feedback should all be integrated back into the improvement initiatives of the organization. So think about things like the end user of the product. So let that guide your decision, right? Because at the end of the day, it's all about the patient and the end user. And that end user can be your mom, it can be your dad, it can be your uncle, it can be your child, it can be yourself. So if we implement quality principles from the very beginning and integrate it into our decision making, we are actually helping ourselves in the long run. With that, we'll transition to we have some of the myths of quality, and I'll let Amanda start us off on that.
Yep. So I think we've mentioned this before. You can get certified to ICH Q10. That is a myth. You do not get certified to ICH Q10. It is a guideline. It does help you build out those principles, and you can get certified to ISO 9001 and get that certificate. So that is a myth. Myth number two.
Myth number two, pharma businesses with outsourced operation don't need a full ICH Q10 PQS. I think we pretty much covered that also, right? Because you need ICH Q10, right? And you don't necessarily need Q8, Q9, and Q10 to be strictly integrated, but the requirement, and you can implement them individually. But the idea is that those three systems work together. So they help build a more robust quality system if they are implemented.
And you have that overall responsibility for your outsourced operations too.
Yep.
Paper-based quality systems are sustainable for long-term ICH Q10 compliance. Do they work? Yes. Are they robust and easy to use? No. I think paper gets lost all over the place. It's extremely difficult. And even cumbersome or multiple systems trying to manage these are not as easy as using like singular EQMSs that are built for that purpose.
Yeah. You need ICH Q8, Q9, and before you can work on Q10. Mentioned earlier, nope, you don't. You really don't. The idea is that you integrate them together, right? But you don't necessarily need to have Q8 in place, Q9 in place before you can do Q10. Pick elements that actually work, like CAPA, knowledge management, things of that nature, and then add in areas that you don't have, like quality by design and risk management.
All right, ICH Q10 is only for pharmaceutical companies, not biotech companies. False. One's under NDA, one's under BLA. Yes, it says pharmaceutical companies, but we're all in the life sciences industry, and a lot of these guidances apply across all different types of pathways. I would even say you can use it in software as a medical device because those quality system elements are very, very similar across all of those products.
Yep. And finally, Q10 is really just the beginning, right? So it is a springboard for doing greater things within your organization. The APQ Cultural Excellence Guide is another great resource that you can use to help you define your metrics and your measurements and to basically track the culture of your quality. So I'll strongly recommend that you check that out also. And then finally, if you are interested, we do have a free ICH Q10 compliance checklist that can be downloaded from the Qualio website. So feel free to check that out. Alice, I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks, Amanda. We've got into huge amounts of detail there, and time's got away from us a little bit, so we'll try and catch up and make sure we finish as quickly as we can. But yeah, thank you both for sharing your insights and your experience as well there. So we're moving on to the penultimate section of today's webinar then, a new way to master your ICH compliance. So for us at Qualio, as you know, we are an EQMS provider, and the ICH Q10 compliance challenges that we've discussed today aren't just something for pharma and biotech companies to think about. As an EQMS provider with hundreds of customers in the industry, understanding where quality and compliance professionals like you are being challenged by regulatory compliance and how to alleviate that burden is a critical part of our product development roadmap. So with that in mind, we've been considering these challenges and working on something very exciting. We had a question about half an hour ago about using AI to simplify pharmaceutical compliance. So Dominique, hope you're still tuning in with us. We've got something very exciting to share, which we launched only just last month at Qualio. So I'm going to really quickly hand over to Colin in our product team for a really quick teaser before we move on to our Q&A. So Amanda, if you wouldn't mind just turning off screen share, and then Colin, you should be able to fire away.
Thanks very much, Alex. Can you see my screen there?
Yeah, that's all good. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Jerry. Hi, everybody. I'm going to try and be quick here, but I'm just introducing our new compliance intelligence tool. It's purpose-built for your compliance needs, and it sits next to our QMS within our platform. And we built this because we found a lot of people, when it comes to compliance, and I'm talking about organizational level compliance now, like complying with standards like 9001 or implementing ICH Q10. They use a QMS plus a spreadsheet plus a shared drive, and we see people a lot trying to use AI now as well, LLMs, and try to do that in a kind of secure way. And we decided to build a product to specifically meet those needs. And this product is built around what we call frameworks, and they're collections of requirements and controls. And these frameworks are pre-built and they're built out by our internal SMEs, Jerry being one of the main people involved in this. And I think Jerry has probably built or reviewed most of what you see here in front of you. And then they're reviewed by external SMEs as well to validate them. And the intention here is to bring all of that compliance activity into one collaborative space whereby you can organize and collate your compliance information. You can assess it using AI, where you can remediate and fix those issues and track and manage that, where you can get visibility of where you are in terms of your compliance, and then finally continuously get a view of your compliance in those various systems you have. So as you can see here, there's a number of different frameworks, and we can see that kind of visibility of where we are already with the number of requirements met versus attention required. But I'm going to start off this demo by actually going to 9001 instead of ICH Q10. And what we see here is we can see how much we've met in terms of requirements, but we can also see the requirements here and the controls. And controls are how we specify that you should meet a requirement. And we can see here for organizational context, we have an organizational context control. There can be one or more controls mapped to a given requirement, as you can see here. Now, what I'm going to do for the purposes of this, and in interest of time, I'm going to use the complaint management control as my kind of demo here. And what is a control? A control is a space where we can collate information. And in this case, this control has two different areas, the process definitions. These are the policies, procedures, and work instructions pertaining to complaint management. And we can also collate our objective evidence here. These are the outputs of that process, in this case, complaints. Now, we can do this manually by adding stuff from the QMS, in terms of, in this case, Qualio. We can do attachments. We also have an AI-powered fetch that will automatically scan your quality management system for you, in this case, Qualio, and see what documentation it thinks is relevant. And it will flag it where AI has done it, so you have that human-in-the-loop traceability. When it comes to the objective evidence, we can also create what's called monitors or rules, whereby the outputs of processes as they happen can be picked up. So in this case, when an event of type complaint is closed, we'll automatically pick it up for you. You won't even have to do it. And then we have our analysis. So if you click here, an AI will run and will analyze your policies, procedures, and work instructions against the requirements. Now, in this case, complaints management is reused against 3 requirements. So once you do this work once, it's done for those 3 requirements. And if there's any issues found, it will create gaps. In this case, we're going very well. There is no gap. So I'll come back to that in a minute. And then we'll also have an analysis of your evidence. Now, when it comes to analyzing your evidence, we don't analyze that just against the requirements. We analyze it against rules extracted from your policies, procedures, and work instructions. So we're analyzing your evidence, how you have specified it, you should create it. And again, in this case, no gaps. So that just gives you an idea of the organization and collation abilities of this and the productivity gains you can get from that. Now, with those productivity gains, you want to put them back into continuous improvement. So now I'm going to jump into ICH Q10, and let's say we're just starting off with ICH Q10. As Jerry said, you don't want to start from scratch. Now we come in here and there's already work happening. But what's happened here is these are controls that are also in 9001. So the work you've done for 9001 is also applicable to ICH Q10. So you're not starting from scratch. These are already mapped for you. I'm going to jump back into complaints because that is also here. In this case, we can still hear there's 4 definitions and 1 piece of evidence, the exact same as we just saw. But in this case, there is a gap. There's an issue. So what's happened? Our analysis is framework specific. So when we ran it for 9001, there was no issue, but now there's an issue for ICH Q10 because ICH Q10 is more specific in its requirements. And what has it called out? In ICH Q10 specifically addresses managing complaint records during product discontinuation, something that 9001 doesn't care about and we didn't have in our process. So it's recommending that we put in something for that. So now we have an idea of what we need to do to get our complaints management in line with ICH Q10. And we can manage that via tasks directly in here without spreadsheets, without project management tools. And we can assign that to Austin, and he will get a task in his dashboard, and he can go and update that policy procedure or work instruction, in this case, the SOP 17. We can rerun an analysis, which will automatically close that gap for us. So this gives us a central location to not only organize, collate, and assess our information, but also to close it out. And then if we come back up here, you can see all of the gaps across the whole framework and all of the tasks. And as we're working through, then once we get all of our definitions in place or evidence, we close our gaps, we can mark those requirements as met, giving us the visibility of how we're progressing through our given standards. And finally, we have the ability to set this up in a continuous monitoring mode. As policies, procedures, and its work instructions are updated, we automatically pick that up, automatically run an assessment, and if there are any issues, notify you so you can get away from that point in time view into a continuous view of compliance. So I know that was very quick, it's about as fast as I can go. We have 3 minutes left for questions, but I'm going to hand back over. So that's our new compliance tool sitting within our Qualio platform, AI powered. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll hand back to you, Alex.
Thank you very much, Colin. So yes, we are just about at time there. So we've obviously answered quite a lot of questions as we've gone on. We do have a few remaining, so we can make a note of those, and we will get back to you separately after the session to ensure that you get an answer for the questions that we didn't get a chance to cover today. So apologies that we ran out of time there. We've gone into huge amounts of details. So we've had a question as well about whether you can access the decks and the recording of today's session. Yeah, you absolutely can. We'll be in touch with you after the session to provide that for you. And I'm going to pop a URL in the chat here if you are interested in learning a little bit more about compliance intelligence and how it can transform your ICH Q10 compliance processes using AI. Just follow the link that I've just popped in the chat there, and we'll be happy to show you the tool in a private demonstration at a time that suits you. So with that in mind, yeah, those 4 outstanding questions, we'll get back to you separately with an answer to make sure that you get the answer that you need there. So all that's left to say is thanks very much, everybody, for joining us today. Hope you've enjoyed it. A big thank you to Amanda and Jerry for sharing your experience and expertise about ICH Q10. We've got a lot of pharmaceutical quality management resources on the Qualio website, including the compliance checklist, which Jerry mentioned a few moments ago. So feel free to check that out. Check out our blog as well. Plenty of resources on there. So Jan, if you're still around, if you want to see everybody out. Thank you, everybody.
Of course. Thank you, Alex. Thank you for wonderful speakers, Amanda, Jerry, another amazing webinar with so many good shared information and knowledge bits. So thank you for joining us. Qualio, great to host your webinars as usual. We have another amazing webinar coming up. I'm putting this in the chat in December on risk management, again with the Qualio team. So if you haven't registered yet, please feel free to register and join us for this exciting session as well. And on this note, I will wish you all a good day, good evening, depending where you're joining us from. And I hope to see you at our next event.
Thanks.
Thank you and goodbye.